now this is the on-table portion of gait assessment. Here's our pictures and fundamentals. 455. And we're going to be paying attention to how the shoulders, right now the contralateral, meaning opposite side, shoulders and hips are functioning together. And seeing if that's functioning appropriately, efficiently. The action will be, if this is the movement that we're doing, then we're going to create that here. And hold that for 10 minutes. But you can see this would be the exaggerated version of the contralateral gait cycle, including at the elbow and knee flexion piece. But we're going to be paying attention to the hip and shoulder flexion. So back down so you don't fatigue out. Now, we're going to be applying pressure at the distal ends of the long bone. So that's going to mean here, or like this will be easiest. But just so you have an awareness, like we're on the anterior side of the upper arm. So the anterior side just above the elbow. It's going to be easier for you to do it like this. And their arm could just drape over you. You see how I could apply pressure here quite easily? And then she could push up against me. And then we just want to meet that resistance. If we're coaching our clients for how much, go ahead and relax. Say 20 to 30%, right? We're going to have them push into us. Go ahead, push. And then I'm going to meet that resistance and give it a little overpressure to confirm they can just accomplish that. Good. Relax.
30%?
I don't know. I'm exceptionally weak, so I have no idea.
I felt like more than 30%.
And the opposing hip, you're just going to break this down into pieces, digestible pieces.
Good.
Okay.
You like pieces.
At the end of the long bone, at the distal end of the femur, here. Okay. Now that's where I would apply pressure for hip flexion. I say, okay, push up against me. You know, there's a little shake there. Good, let go.
Weak.
That individually, back down, that individually, we could call that muscle testing. I just tested for shoulder flexion of the right shoulder and hip flexion of the left hip. Did them individually. Left shoulder, right shoulder, did well, was plenty strong. Left hip tested weak. There is a little bit of a quiver to it, okay? Now, let's flip it around and go for extension. Although we're putting a person already in flexion, it's just because I can't really do it here very easy, like pushing to the table. Yep, that looks good. We can't do it that way. I'm still gonna have them like this, but now I'm gonna place my arm here, distal end of the humerus, just below the elbow, bust it just above the elbow, and then push against me. Hold. Okay, good and strong. Okay, up. Now it's the reverse side here.
So you're gonna pull.
Yep. And then hold, push against me. Plenty strong. And here's the thing, a person's hamstrings and glutes are they're gonna beat you. So that's why you need just a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Going that way, like they're likely to, so that's where you gotta make sure you confirm with them the velocity. So now let's just break that down into the individual pieces for the opposite side. Now, where you stand, I end up doing it on both sides of the table, but it could also look like this, right? I go here, say, okay, hold, that's shoulder flexion, okay, good. Shoulder extension, okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, then
Me
this leg.
reaching, I feel like I would be weaker to reach.
Right, well, on the hip, you're stuck reaching one or the other.
Oh, that's true.
But I feel like when we get here, I do better like this than I do like this. That's just me. So I want you to kind of pay attention to your own bodies and how you do this. Now, for this hip, and here we go, hip flexion, still a little,
Weak.
okay, down, plenty strong.
Sure.
Okay, and then underside. And now try the extension part and try this part. Reach under. Good. Okay, cool. So there's the individual parts. Now we got to couple them together. Now you could do this anywhere. Okay, we could do this anywhere. I stabilize the wrist by grabbing the long bones. Look at the wrist one. I could just grab the wrist, I put it in neutral position, and I say, okay, push against me here.
A little bit more.
I just tested for wrist flexion. Okay, good. Push against me here. Wrist extension. Good, let go. If I were to do the elbow, and then relax. Say, okay, push against me here. Elbow flexion, elbow extension. Elbow flexion, elbow extension. You always want to apply resistance at the distal end of the bones that are moving. Now where you'll have the most leverage. So, muscle testing. Cool. You can do that anywhere. Now to make it about gait, we're going to be having now we're going to have a conversation with this shoulder to this hip. So they'll look like this. And even just being able to get there is already, you're not that bad. So there's that. You can lift your leg out of gravity, you can lift your arm out of gravity. Okay, we're gonna start. You have to pick what your control is. So we're gonna start with, what does the book say? Starting with the shoulder. Okay, we're gonna have, my hand placements are going to be both on the anterior side of their body. See how I'm anterior, anterior, or posterior, posterior. So do this with me. Anterior, anterior. Posterior, posterior. Okay, down. Flip it. This one up, this one up. Okay, anterior, anterior. Posterior, posterior. Yep, 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 yep. Cool. Down. This is also me keeping people from getting cramps. So, all right, got your placements down. Now it's about the control. This one up, this one up. Yeah. We have to start with one and then the other. And one cool thing can be, do we even see that start to move? So push, this, and then push, and see if them together are good. And guess what? Her hip flexion is way better when coupled with the shoulder flexion. So start with the shoulder, then the hip, and both together.
Okay.
Good.
So the first one, she resisted in the arm, and you were watching the leg?
Yeah, it was initially, but I just feel right here and I'll see if they kick up. Don't worry about that. I'm sorry I even said it. Okay. But start with the shoulder, then hip. Good. Cool. Now hip, then shoulder. And see if there's a difference. So shoulder, hip, good. Hip, shoulder. Cool. Down.
Okay.
Now that was for the flexion patterns, okay? But control changed. We used shoulder as a control, we used hip as a control. And just seeing if there's a difference. The difference I saw wasn't that there was a strength difference, but when I individually tested the hip, it was weak. When it was working with the shoulder, it tested strong. All right, now flip it. This is one reason why I prefer this, is I'm not reaching across a person's chest in this position. That's one argument for going around and doing it the other side. That being said, I do tend to just reach across. Now we're doing the opposite side. So this hip with this shoulder. All right, then we're going to use the shoulder as the control, and then the hip. Good. Then the hip, shoulder. A little overpressure. Good. That was a little weaker. Okay. Push, push, and then hip, shoulder. Good. And it got a little bit better. Now, if you keep doing this, it becomes an exercise.
Yeah, I think because I had this up for so long,
Yeah.
so many times.
That's the thing is
it's
that
getting fatigued.
teaching this it's gonna turn into some misreads because the person laying there is gonna either fatigue and or if you repeatedly have a person do this action, you're no longer really going into assessment, you're gonna start turning it into an exercise, okay? Now my 2 cents on all of this as we move forward, it's never wrong to encourage the correct pattern, to make what should be strong, stronger, right? That's why you should do regular exercise, is you're keeping things strong as they should be. So it's never gonna be a bad thing for helping people related to gait to just go here, here, I'm gonna do it in speed time. Okay, push, push, good, push, push, good. Down, up, here, push, push, good, push, push, good, down.
Other side.
That's why you'll see, I mean, over time, you may be okay with reaching across the table, but. Now,
You're right.
we are strengthening the heck out of flexor to flexor, right? Okay. Now, as said, you could do this quite quickly, and this is just a way to say, hey, this is supposed to occur. When the shoulder starts to flex, there should be a neurologic signal going to the opposite hip to also do the same thing so the gait is smooth and controlled, and vice versa. Now we go to the extension pattern where we can counterbalance this. All right, same position. But now we're gonna place our arms on the posterior side of the body. Aha. Now shoulder control, push, leg. Good, let go, leg, shoulder. Good, shoulder, hip. Good, hip, shoulder. Good.
Opposite.
Then opposite side.
Not as fatigued as
No, these will need more work. So posterior side, okay, shoulder, hip, okay, hip, shoulder. Good. Shoulder, hip, hip, shoulder. Cool. That by itself was something I used in pre-event routines. So like pre-event massage would be like a bit more faster paced and incorporate some of the firing pattern, muscle action activation sequences. I tended to put hot packs on stuff and do more faster pace, just free and get stuff moving. A lot of rhythmic oscillation, a little bit of massage, but more kind of this not holding long inhibitory pressure, trying to reduce muscle tone. I want them to go out there and be able to do the thing. We'll do the hold and shut things off after the event, after the game. Right? Probably the day after would be much preferable. Now, but after that would be a quick go through the gait thing, and then off and away you go. You gotta think same side unilateral.
Make sure it's using the right words.
Now that action is gonna look like this. So instead of our arm placement, our control, our resistance of where we're placing our bodies to create the resistance, instead of it being anterior, posterior, it's gonna be posterior, anterior, and anterior, posterior. And much easier because you're not reaching across the table. I'm gonna go here to here. Now we're gonna test shoulder flexors with hip extensors. That's what should occur here. So shoulder, hip. Good. Hip, shoulder. Good. Shoulder, hip,
shoulder, hip,
and hip, shoulder. Cool. Now client, stay there. Bring, take your arms, and now both here. Now it's going to be shoulder extension with unilateral same side hip flexion. Okay, shoulder, hip, hip, shoulder. Okay, good. Shoulder, hip, hip, shoulder. Cool. Down. Now you want to walk all the way around. Okay?
Again.
Shoulder flexors with hip extensors. Hip extensors with shoulder flexors. Shoulder flexors, hip extensors. Hip extensors, shoulder flexors. Good. Then both on the inside, kind of. One posterior, one anterior. Now shoulder extensors with hip flexors. Hip flexors, shoulder extensors. Shoulder extensors, hip flexors. Hip flexors, shoulder extensors. And down. So the hack a bit here is just as far as the therapist is concerned, where your placements are relative to creating resistance. Contralateral, anterior, posterior, unilateral, flip it. And ends up looking like I'm either like this and this, or I'm this or this. And there you go.
Just notice the difference.
Yep, notice the difference, and especially when it's weak. And the patterns that we just went through, all of those should be strong, okay? So I'm starting you out with, rather than paying attention to the red arrows, because there's another way to get to this where it would turn into something like this.
One, relax. Then you have to do
Should this test strong or weak?
one.
Huh? This should test weak, because this is strong. Anterior, anterior. So if I tested this, it should be push, push, and this should feel weak. Now that may not be the case for most people, but that breaks beginners' brains with trying to go from the correct pattern to the incorrect pattern. And from a practical standpoint, it's a little bit easier to just identify if a pattern is weak. And if the pattern is weak, then you make them do it a few more times, and that becomes the exercise to encourage that pattern to strengthen. So I really tell you to hone in on encouraging the correct activation cycles of contralateral versus unilateral. Strengthen those, make sure that they're all strong, and if there's weakness, then do a few more cycles to try to balance that out. That's my 2 cents of where to start, where to actually take this. And one of the obvious best places is if somebody's needing to get ready for some kind of event, going for the marathon, gonna go play the game kind of a thing. The next part is about abduction and adduction, abduction and adduction. We're gonna bend the knees. This one's also just easier because you're not gonna be reaching as much, okay? Now, as far as muscle testing is concerned, and their arms are gonna be here. If I wanted to test for this, just muscle test, that the shoulder adductors, now this is adduction, this is horizontal adduction. So we're still calling it adduction. But if I want to test, a little weaker on the left. Just, you're pushing apart, yeah. So both on the medial sides of the arm versus both on the lateral sides of the arm. Both strong, okay. And that was muscle testing. I had a left weakness a bit.
whatever's comfortable for you.
Very good. And then it's just compare and contrast. Now those should work together. The way the adductors and abductors function is ideally kind of more in this uniform element. One could be argued it's more about posture and kind of both legs being planted into like a standing and posture related dynamic, where it's kind of this kind of stuff. So it's shoulder abductors functioning at the same time, and then when we get to the legs, it's going to be the same. That's all abductors together, all adductors together in terms of their neurologic pairing. But to test individually the hips, here, if you're smaller, you could go so far as to plant here, but sometimes that's a little bit extreme to kind of be like this. So I tend to be here. This arm has to be straight, This forearm's on the inside of their knee, medial side of the knee. This palm is on the medial side of the knee. And then push your legs together. Remember 30%. And then just meet that. If there's a pop, anybody, it's okay. If you feel a pop, like at the groin, that's the pubis symphysis. All right? I'll talk more about that in a sec. Now, the pull apart. Sanitary barriers, like anything, is something that I want to reinforce here, because you'll see a lot of people do stuff like this. You want to be aware that if you're doing that with all your clients, then you've made direct contact with your chest and belly against them. So if you were to do that, please get not even just the sheet, you should have a clean towel you drape over them. So I tend to be like this. Put my arm in the way, and then they're pulling the legs apart. And encouraging that it's the amount that we're talking about the percentages of how much they're using, but we also want to clarify with them, use your hips, not your low back. So there's a thing here, like when you show doing it a little bit wrong, or if you're pulling apart, like see like just the low back do something. And I start to like recruit other muscles. We don't want to see that ideally. If we did, that's part of the assessment, but if I'm using this toward strengthening correct patterns, then I want to say don't do that, just your hips, even if they have to use less force. We have to start with like maybe what feels like to us much less force and velocity. I'd rather that get trained to be stable, and we'll work our way out from there. So a deduction of the hips and comparing one to the other. Do both legs feel stable? Feeling like the left side's got a little stuff, and then a abduction. See how you can pull those off and it's not quite as much of a journey for the therapist, okay? Now, the quickest way to do all of this, and there's a touch of a correlation with flexion and adduction, and abduction and extension, okay? So if we wanted the one that I've used the most, the kind of quick shortcut, and what I've used this the most for, it has been everything from just wanting to encourage better pelvic alignment. I want to encourage these balance muscles to be more active across the body, so when a person gets up, they're not as dizzy, and they're not gonna, fall. So at the end of the session, this became a pretty easy one to do. And like you can even just tuck the sheet in a little bit here, and you can do it all together. I don't even have to do the arm stuff. I have a person push their hands together. So if they're pushing their palms together, that is adduction. Bring their chin down, lift their chin down, flexion, plus adduction of the hip, all together. So that becomes the control now. So push together, chin down, push. That ideally should feel really strong. Good, let go. Okay. That ideally would feel like, because they're a rock, right? Immovable. If there's something up, then you'll feel it here at the legs. There would be reasons to come up here, like I identify with her, maybe the shoulder was a little bit unstable. But for what I've used this the most for has been relative to just encouraging the legs to be more dominant in this pattern. So what I usually end up having occur is the shoulders become the control, and then I'm having them activate the hips. It also works better in terms of how I'm coaching them. So like hands together, push, chin down, okay, push. See how that structure is a little bit easier in the conversation with the client? Cool. Now it would be the reverse as well. So how do we do a abduction? You grip your fingers together, pull apart, head back against the table, and then the pull apart for abduction of the hips. Cool. Okay. Now, as an example of a place that goes further, where you're trying to train things to let go, it could be I have her do that, pull apart, head back, go ahead and do that, pull apart, head back, abduction, extension, and I go to adduction, I go, this is supposed to let go. But I caution you with overpressure on people's joints, right? It's something in the future. relatively distant future for you to return to relative to these actions, because you can maybe go a step further and not just encourage the strong pattern. You could also try to coach when things should let go, when they're supposed to. Is when adduction is happening up here, or abduction, let's say abduction is occurring here, adduction should be weaker. And if adduction is occurring, abduction should be weaker. But can you see how that just gets real confusing real fast? It's much easier to say prayer hands, chin down, push your knees together. Good. Okay, pull apart, head back, pull apart. Easy. And that was somebody's on blood thinners, they're older, you assess they have balance issues. That's a nice thing to sprinkle in at the end of the session, to just get those balance related abductors, adductors active, and they get off the table and you see what your results are. Cool. All right, one full cycle. We could have a person start like this. They don't have to be holding their leg up necessarily. Then arm like this. Okay. Flexion, contralateral flexion. Shoulder, hip. Go ahead and bring that. Yeah. Shoulder, hip.
Shoulder.
Okay. Then hip, shoulder. Good. Then switch. Go on the other side. Shoulder, hip. Hip, shoulder. Good. Down. Other side. Sorry, it's silly to even say that. Okay. Then shoulder, hip. Hip, shoulder. Okay. Opposite sides, the posterior sides of the body. Shoulder,
together.
hip.
Same time.
Good.
This way? Oh, okay.
Hip, shoulder. Good. Down. Anterior, anterior, posterior, posterior.
Just the shoulder.
I always think
Just
opposites are the same, and the same are opposites.
Breathe.
Oh, okay.
All right.
What now?
Yeah.
Individual.
So we'll do it one more time.
One and the other, and then together.
Anterior, anterior.
That makes sense.
You don't have to push. Anterior, anterior. Posterior, posterior.
Yeah.
Good. Then flip it.
And what did I do on the other side?
Anterior, anterior. Posterior, posterior.
Okay.
Another argument why it might be better for you to, in your real practice, go to the other side of the table. Then there's same side, unilateral. Flexion and extension, so it's going to be anterior, posterior. Shoulder, hip, hip, shoulder. Then flip it. Both your arms are going to come on the insides, sort of, but it's going to be posterior, anterior. So shoulder, hip, then hip, shoulder. Good.
And then
Down.
inside.
Okay. Opposite side. Yeah, you guys walk off around. It's not necessarily to the reach. All right. Anterior, posterior for flexion of the shoulder, extension of the hip. So shoulder, hip. Okay. Hip, shoulder. Good.
Yeah.
Then switch. Now it's going to be extension of the shoulder, flexion of the hip. So shoulder, hip,
So
hip, shoulder.
when I did this.
Good.
No, I did this and then this. I
Now
released this
knees
one a
up,
little bit.
feet flat,
I noticed that.
hands together, chin
I'll
down.
do it again.
Push your hands together, push your legs together.
I let go of this one for some
Good. Okay. Pull apart,
reason.
head back, pull apart,
Yeah. I
Good.
focus on this one,
Push
and I release
together.
this one.
chin down, push together,
Yeah.
pull
Just
apart,
every time.
head back, pull apart.
Could you think about it now?
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. So shoulder.
Getting a workout.
That's
Yeah.
All the little muscles.
Yeah, right. Now, you can see how
Yeah.
you do that enough, then you basically put them through some therapy, right? So, I already said reasons of why to do this, but this can be an important thing to try to just remember to be able to sprinkle in. Even if it is just to say, even if you find something that tests weak, just have them do that a couple extra reps and then just go through the pattern. Don't fatigue them out, it's a massage, right? So, but especially as you move forward with clients that are looking to you for therapeutic change, and especially those that are undergoing true rehab, this is where we can make a big potential impact for somebody that just got hip replacement or shoulder replacement. This can be a big deal to just help encourage these correct neurologic patterns as they're going through their physical therapy cycle, right? Where we can be just an extra little added piece to help facilitate improvement. All right, go ahead and swap, and I'll show this all again.